Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take the sources you send us and really pull out the core insights. Think of it as your shortcut to being properly informed.
Yeah, without getting bogged down. And this particular deep dive, they've tailored it for the learner. Someone who wants that knowledge quickly, but also wants the depth, appreciates different angles, those aha moments.
Exactly. And, crucially, doesn't want to feel overwhelmed by it all.
Right. So, today, we're looking at excerpts from a YouTube video. It's called Boven et Meyerveld, #86, Flavio Pasquino over BLCKBX, Lighthouse TV, Doping and Thine Stem Up the PVV, uploaded by Wybern van Haga.
It's quite a title. Covers a lot, clearly.
It really does. And our mission, essentially, is to understand what Flavio Pasquino is sharing here. We're talking his career changes, which are pretty interesting.
Yeah.
His media stuff, Black Box, now Lighthouse TV, his views on big things like the COVID response, the political scene, and even some, personal reflections, doping, faith, that sort of thing.
Okay, let's dive in then. The conversation actually starts with a bit of humor, doesn't it? Flavio apologizing.
Yeah, he missed a previous appointment, apparently on Mother's Day. Got the date mixed up, was totally unreachable, no phone.
Whoops.
And his apology gifts were, quite specific. BVNL clogs, that's Wybern van Haga's party, Belang van Nederland,
Right.
in size 40, hoping they'd fit, and some Edam cheese from the media park in Edam.
Very Dutch. It does sort of set a tone, maybe, a certain directness.
Perhaps, yeah, a unique character. But moving past the clogs and cheeses, we get into his background pretty quickly. Former pro cyclist, then into film and TV production.
And then this is the really unusual part, back to cycling much later in life. Got a Guinness World Record.
That's right, oldest debutante.
Oh,
wow. It's not your standard career path, is it?
Not at all.
And it seems his early life choices were tied to cycling, too. He mentions not doing military service because he was aiming to be a pro cyclist, plus he had pacifist beliefs.
Okay, and family life.
Married to Femke, 2 sons, Pele, who's 11, and Rocco, 22. You get the sense this context, family, probably played a role in some decisions later on.
Makes sense. So that initial cycling career, why didn't it quite take off?
He says, basically, not enough wins. He was a strong time trialist, apparently, but in pro cycling, you need those victories, That's what gets you team support.
The harsh reality of pro sports.
Yeah.
Talent isn't always enough.
Exactly. The system wants wins, and that later debut at 39, while amazing, only lasted a year. He stopped because of the impact on his family.
That tracks. It's a demanding life.
Hugely demanding. And then there's the doping discussion. He's remarkably open about it.
Yeah, talking about experimenting with amphetamines back in the day. Yeah. He mentions a specific race, Montpellier, Barcelona, where he used them and still came last.
It paints a picture of a very different era in cycling, doesn't it?
Completely.
His perspective is interesting. He talks about EPO and how during that period it felt like it created a sort of level playing field.
Controversial take now, but maybe understandable for the time.
He suggests it was almost like a prerequisite then. You needed it for a career. But he contrasts that sharply with today. Blood passports, the whereabouts system.
Much more intense scrutiny now.
Way more intense. He thinks it impacts athletes' personal lives much more now. A big shift in accountability.
Definitely a world away.
Yeah.
Okay, so shifting gears to his media career. That started during the COVID period with his own YouTube channel.
Yeah, he felt driven to make videos about certain things, like issues in elderly care. Seems like a reaction to things he was seeing.
So moving from personal sports challenges to broader societal issues.
Kind of, yeah. Then he joined Weltschmerz, got connected through Max van Creveld. He enjoyed interviewing people there, like Ahis Hamelink.
But he wanted to do his own thing more professionally.
Exactly. He wanted to professionalize his own channel, and that leads to why he left Weltschmerz.
What were the reasons there?
He talks about perceived differences in content quality and maybe a lack of consistent journalistic standards across the platform.
Right. The challenge of platforms with lots of different creators, maintaining standards can be tough.
For sure. And that dissatisfaction seems to be part of the seed for Black Box.
Black Box.
Yeah.
Launched during the pandemic.
Yeah.
What was the driving force?
A really strong feeling, he says, like nothing of the story is right. A deep distrust of the official narratives, the press conferences.
Okay.
He felt this sort of mission to counter it, to bring on experts who could challenge the dominant story with, more detailed information.
And that clearly resonated with a lot of people.
Oh, massively. Black Box got huge viewership. He mentions an episode with Theo Shedders hitting over 1 million views. There was clearly an audience looking for those other perspectives.
But they faced challenges too, right? Censorship?
Big time. He calls it Cordonson tightrope walking, constantly navigating social media rules, the threat of being kicked off YouTube or LinkedIn.
Interesting. He says he was never banned from Twitter, though.
Yeah, suggests different platforms had different approaches or maybe different triggers.
So why end Black Box and start Lighthouse TV?
He frames it as looking forward. Black Box served its purpose during that specific time, he feels. Lighthouse TV. The name itself is deliberate.
How so?
Well, a plane's black box helps you understand the past, right? What went wrong. A lighthouse, though, shines a light, guides you in the dark. He wants Lighthouse TV to illuminate information that's often obscured.
Moving from analysis of the past to guidance for the present and future.
Something like that. And he emphasizes the neutrality aspect. A lighthouse is for everyone. He wants it to be a trusted beacon, regardless of your politics.
That's a tall order in today's media climate. Neutrality.
It really is. But that's the goal. He mentions it started well, subscriber growth, and they have this builder program, people contributing monthly, aiming for 1,500, 2,000 builders for financial stability.
An interesting funding model for independence.
Definitely. Okay, let's shift to something more personal. His views on faith.
Right. He describes himself as label, fluctuating.
Yeah, that's the word he uses. He admires people with deep faith, mentions Peter van der Weert, Isaac Krenz, but struggles to fully believe himself. It's quite honest.
And he makes a distinction between different kinds of faith.
He does. He contrasts what he sees as sort of passive faith, maybe like traditional Catholicism, with more active faith, like evangelicalism, which he sees as more community-focused, more outwardly expressed.
And he's noticed more people turning to faith after COVID.
He observes that, yeah. Raises questions, about spirituality in times of crisis.
Interesting. What about his own personality? He's quite self-aware, isn't he?
Very. Admits to being difficult, stubborn, principled. He connects it back to his cycling days.
Does he see those as bad things?
Not necessarily. He sort of contrasts it with societal mediocrity, implying these traits can be positive, maybe necessary for achieving things.
And this connects to his political leanings.
Seems to. He aligns with classical liberalism, individual freedom. That provides a kind of philosophical anchor for his views, especially on, well, the pandemic.
Okay, let's get into that. COVID-19. This was obviously huge for him, the catalyst for Black Box.
Absolutely. He says right from the start he felt something was wrong with the official story. Skeptical early on.
Questioning the data, mentioning Maurice DeHaan's analysis.
Right. And he experienced censorship himself for voicing those doubts. He talks about a pretty hostile interview with Sander Schimmelpenninck,
where he felt attacked for his views.
Yeah, he uses this analogy, the lion and the donkey feeling like a minority being attacked for not following the herd. It really conveys that feeling of polarization.
And his personal choices. Vaccination.
He says he isn't vaccinated, and he's happy his close family isn't either. He's critical of mandates, especially for medical students.
And disappointed there wasn't a full parliamentary inquiry.
Very disappointed. He wanted a deeper investigation into the whole response.
He points to others who were raising flags early on, too.
Yeah, Theo Shedders, again, with his data. Pierre Capel, Rob Ellen's names that became associated with the critical perspective. He even links it back to the Mexican flu, suggesting patterns in WHO influence.
Which raises questions about how these global responses get coordinated.
Exactly. He wonders why there was such widespread compliance. Was it fear? Trust in authority? He even mentions the term mass psychosis.
And questions about the timing, the synchronization globally. Referencing Event 201.
He brings that up, yeah, the pandemic simulation exercise. It fuels questions about preparedness versus, planning.
He also shares some personal anecdotes about side effects.
He does. Mentions hearing stories, the difficulty people had discussing potential vaccine side effects, and interestingly, his own father, who was a doctor,
initially disagreed with Flavio.
Yes, but apparently later on, before he passed away, his father acknowledged having concerns about the vaccine risks.
Wow. That highlights the debates happening even within families and the medical community.
For sure. Flavio expresses frustration that many doctors just seem to follow guidelines without question.
And contrasts that with, what did he call it, the Orville.
Yeah, the primal feeling, particularly of mothers who instinctively felt the policies were wrong for their kids and pushed back.
A real tension between that gut feeling and professional pressure.
Absolutely. Because questioning things could mean risking your job, your livelihood. That was a huge pressure for many professionals.
Looking at the political parties back then.
He saw almost total agreement initially. Except for BVNL and Forum for Democracy, they were the outliers questioning the consensus early on.
Which brings us to his PVV vote. not necessarily ideological.
No, he describes it purely strategically. To stop Groenlink's PVDA, the Green Left coalition, from becoming the biggest party.
But he's disappointed with how things turned out.
Yeah, it doesn't feel expectations are met. He calls PVV a Brandverträger, a fire retardant. Slowing things down, maybe, but not the solution he wants.
Because his core beliefs are different.
Right. He stresses he's a classical liberal, a capitalist,
Ah.
against collectivism. So the vote was tactical, not a full endorsement.
And he's critical of the current government, even with PVV in the mix, on things like asylum policy.
Yeah, points to asylum centers still being set up. He wonders if voting for smaller parties like BVNL or FED would have changed anything. And he mentions the EU's influence, limiting what national governments can do.
Complexities of coalition government and supranational bodies.
Definitely. Now, a shift to some more controversial figures he was asked about. Andrew Tate, Nick Fuentes.
What's his take there?
Strong rejection, particularly if Fuentes calls his views anti-Semitic, racist, anti-woman. Very clear condemnation.
But he tries to understand their appeal.
He does. He speculates it might be a backlash among some young men against, quote, woke propaganda. An overreaction causing another overreaction, maybe? A search for balance.
And mentions incels potentially being part of that following.
He throws that term in, yeah. Trying to understand the audience. He even makes a quick comparison to controversial Dutch comedy group Jiskefet from the past.
Suggesting maybe these kinds of provocative figures emerge cyclically.
Perhaps. It's a brief point, but interesting. There are a few other quick mentions, too.
Like what?
Some speculation about a potential new pope, Leo XIV, with dual U.S.-Peruvian passports. Flavio mentioning he wants to reapply for his Italian passport.
Oh, okay. And didn't he used to oppose dual citizenship for politicians?
He mentions that, yeah, a past stance. Also, a quick comment on a video clip of Macron and Keir Starmer speculating about substance use.
Right, just brief mentions.
And concerns about the WHO treaty, potential loss of health sovereignty, and criticism of Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus' leadership there. More quick hits on current topics.
So wrapping up this deep dive, quite a journey through Flavio Pasquino's world. Cycling, media, strong opinions on COVID, politics.
Yeah, a multifaceted career, definitely.
Right.
And some really critical takes on how society handled the pandemic, the political dynamics in the Netherlands, plus those personal bits about belief and identity.
What were the most surprising things, maybe?
For me, perhaps the sheer openness about the past doping, also his sort of searching stance on faith, and just the intense conviction behind starting Black Box, that feeling that something was fundamentally wrong.
Yeah, you get a strong sense of his motivation. So for you listening, hopefully this has given you a solid but manageable overview of the perspectives Flavio shared in this interview.
We really encourage you to think about the different viewpoints, the reasons behind them, how individuals and groups try to make sense of these really complex times.
And maybe a final thought to leave you with. Thinking about that constant tension, right, between individual freedom and what's needed for the collective.
Or maybe how societies react to crises. Do we tend to swing too far one way, then have to correct? And what does it mean long-term when we hand over authority on things like health to international bodies?
Lots to mull over. We invite you to keep exploring those big questions.